Hello, I'm Julia, and welcome back to NB Library. This is my October reading wrap-up. I gotta get through this one pretty quickly because I'm on my way to a Halloween party. I read 23 books this month, and it was, just going by my ratings average, my best reading month of the year. So let's break down the numbers. 26% of the books that I read this month were purchased. The rest were from the library. 43% were on audio. 35% of the books were by white authors. 26% were by black authors, and 39% were by indigenous and other peoples of color. And my average star rating was 3.85, which is, like I said, the best that I've had all year. My average rating for the year is hovering around 3.56, so I may have actually bumped up the average just with this month. I only read 9 books that I rated below 4 stars, and the rest, 14, were 4 stars or above. And a little bit of a spoiler for further on in the video, I did read a 5-star book this month, which is only my 8th of the year. So let's get into talking about the books and reviewing them. The first book that I read in October, or rather finished in October because I started this in September, was The Golden Boy's Guide to Bipolar by Sonora Reyes, and I rated it 4 stars. This is a sequel to The Lesbiana's Guide to Catholic School, one of my favorite books of the year, and although that book definitely has some dark moments, this sequel is very dark. It deals with a lot of very difficult topics. I would definitely look up trigger warnings before you start reading it. The main character is bipolar. He's pushing away a lot of his friends and family. He has a lot of internalized homophobia that comes from religion and goes to some really dark places in this book. But I think that it was handled well, even though it wasn't always like a fun time to be reading it. It was very, very heavy and sad, and it wasn't as laugh out loud funny as Lesbiana's Guide was. It was good to see the main character Cesar get to a better place in his life after hitting some really low lows. The next book that I read was What Stalks the Deep by T. Kingfisher, which I rated 4.25 stars. This is the 3rd book in the Sworn Soldier series, starring Alex Easton, a non-binary former soldier for the fictional small European country of Galatia. In this book, Alex is called to America to help old friend Denton, who they met in the first book, who is American, and have to go to a very creepy Appalachian coal mine. There were points in this book where I was shouting, "Ursula, no! Stop it! No!" because I was freaked out. It all wraps up in a very suitably Ursula fashion, but I was cackling, I was scared, but I was also just having a great time. I love Alex Easton as a character. I love Ka voice. I am using neopronouns because Alex is non-binary and uses Ka Con neopronouns. I've bought all these books on audio because I love listening to them read by Avi Roque, who also plays Rain on The Owl House, one of my favorite shows. And this was just another really good entry in the series for me. There's always a moment where Alex is getting in trouble and trying to get out of it, and as a non-binary person, I'm just picturing myself there and doing that, and it gives me so much gender euphoria. And as I mentioned in previous video for my r/female gaze SFF reading challenge, I read this for that challenge for the Folk Horror Square. The next book that I read was Turning by Jessica J. Lee. This is about the author's year that she spent swimming all of the lakes around and in Berlin. There are 52 of them, give or take, I believe, and so she tries to swim in one every week of a calendar year. And I liked this book. I thought it was good. I don't know if it was the time that I was reading it, but for some reason, I kept falling asleep while I was reading it. It's very quiet and slow-paced. I loved her descriptions and getting into the science and geology of lakes and the history of the region, but yeah, it was putting me to sleep, unfortunately. And if I didn't already say, I rated that 3.75 stars. I then read Fate's Bane by C.L. Clarke, which I used for one of the TBR Harvest prompts. This is a novella about 2 young women in a sort of Celtic, Welsh-esque region. It's this big marshland, and they are from warring clans. The main character gets sort of adopted as a hostage sibling into a rival clan and grows to fall in love with the leader of the clan's daughter. I rated this 3.5 stars, and it just didn't quite hit for me. I don't think it was badly written or anything, and there were definitely some surprises and very poignant moments. I liked the central relationship, but it never fully clicked for me. I felt like I was at a little bit of a remove from the main character, and I just thought it was kind of fine. Next was Let's Get Together by Brandy Colbert, one of my favorite middle grade authors. She also writes YA, but particularly her middle grade are some of my favorites. This is a sort of retelling of The Parent Trap, where two twin sisters are separated when they're very, very young. One of them goes into the foster care system and eventually ends up going to the same school as her twin, and they try and get their biological father and the one sister's foster mom to get together. I thought this was so sweet. I mean, like all of Brandy Colbert's middle grade, the prose is so simple but so perfect. I loved the family dynamics, and the two sisters have a tumultuous relationship at first. Before they know they're sisters, the one who stayed with her dad is just jealous of the other one. She doesn't like that everyone thinks they look alike. They do because they're twins. And just is afraid of things changing in her life. But like I said, I thought the family relationships were so beautiful. I was rooting for their dad and the foster mom so hard. They were so cute. Also weird to think that they're around my age, because the dad and the twins' mom had the kids when they were very young, and now that the girls are 11, 12, the dad's in his early 30s. I'm like, oh, I'm almost in my early 30s. Wild. Yeah, I love this. I thought it was so cute, while still able to talk about some pretty hard topics of living in the foster system and being separated from a parent in a way that Brandy Colbert handles really, really beautifully, I think, in all of her middle grade books, and I gave it 4.5 stars. Next was We Set the Dark on Fire by Telo Mejia, which I read for TBR Harvest, and I gave 4 stars. This could have been a kind of paint-by-numbers YA dystopia book, and I think it's really a testament to K. Mejia's writing that it's not, and that it manages to go deeper and say some really interesting things and have this central sapphic romance all at the same time. I didn't think that about the sequel, which I'll get into in a little bit, but this is a world where all rich and powerful men have 2 wives. They're Primera and Segunda. The Primera is their business partner. She helps him politically, but they don't touch. They don't have a physical relationship. And then the Segunda is the mom. She bears the children, raises the children, and is meant to be the sort of flighty, colorful, very feminine one. Our main character, Dani, is from outside this very stratified society and is trying to hide the fact that she is an immigrant from over this wall that surrounds their island that they live on. But she has been assigned to be the primera for a very powerful young man, and then her rival in school, Carmen, is selected to be his segunda. Dani is such a great YA character that we don't see very often. She is very careful, she's calculating without ever being cruel. She is aware that this system is bad, but her parents sacrificed so much to get her there that she has to do her best and give her all and make their sacrifice worth it, and then is unlearning that over the course of the novel and getting involved with a resistance group. I loved Dani as a character. Her relationship with Carmen was so soft and cute. I think it went a little bit too fast, and there are some things that are revealed at the end that make me still quite mad at Carmen. But I was really impressed by this book, and I gave it 4 stars. Next was Murder by Memory by Olivia Waite. I reviewed this sort of already in the r/female gaze SFF video, so I won't go into a lot of depth here, but this is a sci-fi murder mystery novella. It's sapphic. I really loved the tactile details of the like cozy sci-fi. I'm less than a third of the way through here. I gotta pick up the pace. Now we're getting into books that I read for my TBR Harvest vlog, so you can go watch that to get my longer thoughts on them. Here I'll just give you the rating. I read The Bewitching by Solia Moreno Garcia, and I gave it 3.25 stars. The Formidable Miss Cassidy by Mehan Bohi, which I gave 4.25 stars. Speakeasy by Catherine Valente, which I gave 3 stars. And I have it here. Natural Connection by Joyce Longdon, which I gave 3.5 stars. I then listened to the audio for Queen Demon by Martha Wells. This is the sequel to Witch King, and it's not said anywhere, so I'm letting you know, and this is not a spoiler, this is not the last book in the series. I thought this would be a duology. It's not. It's a trilogy? Who knows? I can't find any information about it online. This is one of those books that I found myself enjoying more than the first book. I am noticing that I tend to like the second book in a trilogy the most for some reason, but when I read Witch King a few years ago, I liked it, but I was having a little bit of trouble understanding the world. There were a lot of characters, there were 2 timelines going on, a lot of concepts, and Martha Wells does this a lot. She builds really robust worlds, but like in the Murderbot Diaries, her worlds are sometimes so different from ours that I have trouble finding just anything familiar to grasp onto and really understand what's going on. But because I had read that book, and I actually reread a synopsis to remember what had happened in Witch King, I feel like I hit the ground running in Queen Demon, and I understood the terms, I understood the world building, I knew what was going on, and we pick up right where we left off in both timelines, and I was really glad of that, because in Witch King, you know that they're about 100 years after the events of the first timeline, and that all these things have happened, and they went through this whole war, and there's this very important character who's now passed away in the present-day timeline, who we get to see in the first book, and we know that Kai, the main character, has a romance with him, but don't really get to see that yet. So in this book, we're in the middle of the war. That prince who's leading the war, Bashasa, we're getting to see so much more of him, his and Kai's relationship really starting to blossom into a romance. And I love seeing all of Kai's ingenuity and the way that he comes at problems, and the ways that he has to pivot, the way that he uses his skills to fight or get out of bad situations. As I've been writing a fantasy novel that I'm working on, and the characters get stuck, I think, what would Kai do in this situation? So I liked this far more than I thought I would. As a matter of fact, when I started listening to the audiobook, it had a cast of characters at the beginning, and there were so many names and people that I was supposed to remember that I didn't from the first book, and I almost DNF'd. But I'm so glad that I didn't, because I had a great time listening to this. I gave it 4 stars. Going back because I missed a book, I finished listening to We Unleash the Merciless Storm by Taylor K. Mejia, the sequel to We Set the Dark on Fire, which I unfortunately rated 2.75 stars. Remember how I said that the first book could have been like a paint-by-numbers dystopia? In the second book, I felt like it was a lot more cliche, and it felt like a YA book that I'd read before, with like a rebellion and a character who was sassy and could fight. It's told from Carmen's point of view instead of Dani's, and Carmen is so much more of a character that I've seen over and over and over again. Where Dani felt like a breath of fresh air, Carmen just felt cliched, unfortunately. And there were things that happened in this book where, even though they were teenagers and aren't as smart as adults in most cases, and just don't have enough knowledge to see through some of the things that were going on, I was still shouting at them like, come on, it's obvious, come on, just, without spoiling anything, like, can't you see what's going on here? That was very frustrating. I felt like the characters were being stupid the entire time. And after Queen Demon, I read Ladylike by Mackenzie Lee, which is a sapphic Regency romance. This book has the bold idea to have a major historical figure in a prominent position, and you know what? I can respect that. I believe it was KJ Charles who said in a blog post that there were only ever like 25 dukes at a time in Regency England, and you know, in Regency romances, dukes were getting romances all over the place, but these were very powerful men, and we know who the dukes were at the time. And so she's like, it's only a matter of time before the prime minister, a made-up prime minister, gets a romance. And so, for reasons that I won't spoil, that was kind of playing at the back of my mind. But this is a story about two women who, for their own reasons, are pursuing the same man to try and marry him. But in actuality, they end up falling in love with each other. I really liked both characters. I thought that they were very distinct, had great, well-established voices, and those voices were distinct from each other. I thought that they both had such important reasons for doing what they were doing. Sometimes I feel like one love interest in a romance is sketched out more than the other, and you kind of know like, okay, so this one's the main character, this one's not, but they both get equal POV, and so one of them just feels kind of flat, but that was not the case here. I think that both characters were really strong. I think it went on a little bit too long, and there were some scenes that have kind of blurred together in my mind, and scenes that didn't necessarily need to be there. But I did like it. I thought it was very funny and cute, and I rated it 3.75 stars. Now we're getting into my streak of books that I rated 4.25 stars. So that is The Summer War by Naomi Novik, A Mouthful of Dust by Nevo, A Spectral Hue by Craig Lawrence Gidney, and Thieves Gambit by Kavion Lewis. I listened to The Summer War on audio, and I was out on a walk on my lunch break, and at some point in the walk, I realized like, oh, I haven't taken in any of my surroundings because I'm so caught up in listening to this book. It had that feeling of like a modern day fairy tale, and Naomi Novik is known for her fairy tale retellings, but this one is a original one in a new world. And I was just so caught up in the beautiful details of the Summerland, basically a fairyland where fae live, the main character and the relationship with her brothers. This is just one of those perfect little jewels of a novella where it's exactly the length that it needs to be. It's sort of melancholy and short and sweet, and when it's done, you just think like, oh, damn, that was great. I think my only gripe is that by the ending, the main character kind of stopped mattering, and I wanted her to have more agency in the climax. There's a solution that she needs to come up with, or that someone needs to come up with, and she comes up with it, but it's like one little moment, and otherwise she's kind of watching other people do things, so I wanted her to have more things to do at the end of the book. A Mouthful of Dust is the next book in the Singing Hills cycle, which reliably comes out with about one novella a year. This is another series of novellas with a non-binary main character that I really love. This is a story about people surviving a famine, and Cleric Chi, the main character, comes to their town to listen to their stories about it, and so we get into, I mean, hardly a spoiler, but lots of aspects of cannibalism, specifically cannibalism during a famine, and what people will do to survive when they've been starving for months and months and months on end. And it turned out to be quite spooky. I ended up slotting that one into a TBR Harvest prompt. I used it as Signs of Luck because there is a white cat on the front, and in the Singing Hills, a white cat is bad luck. A Spectral Hue was actually one of the oldest books on my TBR and a book for r/fantasy book bingo. I read it for the self-published Square. This is a story about a particular small town in Maine that has been home over the years to several extraordinary artists who all work with this one particular color, a sort of magenta purple. We're following several main characters, all of whom are queer, as they're living in this town called Shimmer and dealing with the effects that this town has on people. This book ended up being just really beautiful. I was really impressed by it. This isn't Craig Lawrence Gidney's first book. He had a book of short story collections, which I've also read, but I think it's his longest work to date, and it felt so self-assured. Like, I wouldn't have thought at all that it was his debut novel. The reason that this isn't rated higher, although as I was reading it, I thought that it was going to be rated higher, is that the ending ends like, you know, when like the really important thing happens in the book, it's like, this is the moment, and then usually there's a few scenes after that. This one ended like right when the climax happened. You're like, whoa, oh, okay. Like, I felt a little bit out of breath when it ended, and I wanted there to be a little bit more fallout from it and wrap up for the characters. But I do always want to spend more time with characters at the end of a book, so maybe that's just a me problem. And then Thieves Gambit by Kavion Lewis. This is a YA heist book about a girl from a famous thieving family in the Caribbean who's invited to participate in a heist competition. All of her other competitors are teens with similar backgrounds, and they travel all over Europe stealing things. I was reading this at the same time as the Louvre Museum got broken into, and because both those things were happening at the same time, I was kind of like, oh damn, that's cool, in reaction to the Louvre getting burgled. I thought this book was great. The reason that I'm not rating it higher, even though I really, really enjoyed it, is that, like with a lot of YA books, the prose was nothing to write home about, but I really liked the characters. It had that competent main character that I always look for, and like, you gotta have a competent character in a heist. Like, heists are competence porn, and I love them for that. She was only 17, or maybe 18, no, I think she was 17, but she knew what she was good at. She still had flaws that got her into trouble, realistically, and then the ending, oh my god, I cannot wait to read the sequel. Unfortunately, coming out of our 4.25 star streak was The Door on the Sea by Cassidy Russell, which I rated 2.5 stars. I did an entire vlog about this, which actually hasn't come out yet, so I'm not going to tell you anything more. You'll have to watch the vlog to see why I rated it as low as I did. Fortunately, the next book that I read was The Calculating Stars by Mary Robinette Kowal, one of the oldest books on my TBR, and a book that I adored, but at the same time, I've read all the same source material that the author has, and so while it was going on, I was like, yep, yep, okay, yep, and then they, yep, okay, yeah, and then they, yeah, okay, yep, okay, I'm getting it, yeah. I've read Hidden Figures, I've read Rise of the Rocket Girls, I've read Mercury 13, I've read Packing for Mars, I've read Biography of Sally Ride, I've read every single book on WASPs and female World War II pilots that I can get my hands on, but I should probably tell you why all of that is relevant. This is an alternate history book set in 1952 when a meteor strikes the East Coast, wiping out the capital and forever changing history. And as it turns out, the meteor has greatly accelerated climate change, and the main characters realize that in 50 years, the Earth will basically be uninhabitable. So they have to go to space. Space program really starts to accelerate, so we see all the fallout of the meteor hitting, and then fast forward about 4 years to when the capital is moved to Kansas City, and the main character is a calculator, while her husband is the lead engineer on the rocket projects. I put this on my TBR when I was reading all of those female scientist and pilot books. In fact, I made a video about female scientist books back in like 2018 or something like that, and so many of those books fed right into this one for me, and I kind of wish that I'd read this book at the same time as those when I was like really into female pilots and scientists. Not that I'm not these days, but I feel like I've just read all the books that I can on the subject, unfortunately, which is not true. I have found some recently and I'm kind of getting back into that, but I digress. The main character, Elma, she's a fantastic candidate to be an astronaut. She has piloting experience, she has a doctorate in physics, I think, but she has to fight tooth and nail for them to recognize, like, hey, if we're going to establish a colony, we're going to need women. But it takes them forever to come to this conclusion. Meanwhile, Elma and lots of other incredibly qualified women are just chomping at the bit to be trained to be astronauts. I love this. I gave it 4.5 stars, and it's taking everything in me to read the books that I need to for my next few videos and not read the rest of the books in this series kind of all in one go. I gotta say though, and forgive me, if Elma was a wasp in World War II, and then she mentioned several times that she was flying in Europe. She tells a story about how she was flying in France when 3 Messerschmitts came upon her. She didn't have weapons because ferry pilots didn't have weapons on their planes. She also mentioned that she met this one character while they were both flying in France, or rather in Europe. But the wasps didn't fly in Europe. They never flew in anywhere outside of the US. You could fly in Europe if you were flying for the ATA. Several American women did that. I just read Spitfires, which is a great book on American women flying for the ATA, but even they weren't ferrying planes in France until well into 1945, when it was really safe for them to do so. And the Wasps were disbanded in 1944, so there was absolutely no way that she could have been flying anywhere near France ferrying a plane. There is one aspect of this that is alternate history before 1952 in the Meteor that she mentions in the epilogue, where the president isn't Truman, it's Dewey after the war, but she doesn't mention the fact that apparently the Wasps were flying in Europe. Were they also flying the Pacific? This literally kept me up at night. I then listened to the audio of The Isle in the Silver Sea by Tasha Suri. I have a longer vlog dedicated to reviewing this book, so I will let you watch that when it comes out in a few weeks, but in the meantime you can know that I rated it 4.25 stars. Next is another book in a future vlog, The Devil Three Times by Ricky Fain, and you can watch that one to have my more in-depth thoughts on it, but I did rate it 3 stars. Last was my 5-star book of the month, The Adventures of Amina al-Sirafi by S.A. Chakraborty. Just finished this book like an hour ago. I'm still kind of riding the high of it. I want to smile and cry a little bit talking about it. I absolutely loved it. It was a fantasy pirate story, just a rollicking adventure with a great female main character, locations I want to go to, fantastic plot, twists and turns. Yeah, one of my favorite books of the year. That one will also be in a future vlog. That's my Dimension 20 read-alikes, which is coming out in a few weeks. Not quite done filming that yet. But that is all the books that I read in October. All 23 of them. Thought I was going to get 24, but it didn't quite happen. That's fine. 23 is a great number to have read. Thank you so much for watching. Please like and subscribe if you enjoyed this video, and I will see you next week.